Welcome to Whole Word Ministries. Thank you for joining us for our study on Talmudic Judaism from our Abrahamic Religions series. This series covers the three major Abrahamic religions, Talmudic Judaism, Roman Christianity, and Islam. And also we're going to add in the true religion of Yahweh. The title of that study is The Way, the Truth, and the Life. Judaism claims its origins are in the religion of Moses. However, Moses was not Jewish, nor did he adhere to the religion of Judaism. Moses was a Yahwist. Now, this is not the same Yahwism that you'll find if you do an internet search of the term. Moses worshipped Yahweh in the method of worship that Yahweh commanded us to worship him, by following his Torah, his law. Yahwism is the same religion that was handed down from Adam through Noah and Shem to Abraham, and eventually to Abraham's grandson Jacob, whom Yahweh renamed Israel. This is the religion whose priestly order is called Melchizedek, of which Yeshua now sits as the high priest at the right hand of Yahweh. Judaism, on the other hand, has its true origin from the Babylonian exile in 572 BC. Psalm 110 verses 1-4. Yahweh says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Yahweh sends forth from Zion your mighty scepter. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will offer themselves freely on the day of your power in holy garments. From the womb of the morning, the dew of your youth will be yours. Yahweh has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. We find a definition of Judaism on the Jewish website chabad.org. The author is Menachem Posner. Judaism, the Jewish religion, is defined as the totality of beliefs and practices of the Jewish people as given by God and recorded in the Torah, or Hebrew Bible, and subsequent sacred writings of Judaism, Talmud and Kabbalah. Judaism mandates that Jewish people follow the mitzvot, divine commandments. Major mitzvot include resting and celebrating on Shabbat and Jewish holidays, eating kosher foods, studying Torah, and living in accordance with its teachings. Judaism is based on the God's covenant with the forefathers and the revelation at Sinai when he chose the Jewish people as his own and they committed to follow the Torah. So first we're going to take a quick detour from our topic for a moment and address a very important error in the final paragraph of Posner's definition of Judaism. God did not choose the Jewish people as his own at Mount Sinai. In recent years, a movement has developed to redefine what the word Jewish means, changing it from its historical definition to a generalized term for all Israelites. This meaning is inaccurate, as the Israelites never called themselves Jews. All Jews are Israelites, but not all Israelites are Jews. When people apply the term Jews to all Israelites, they have an inaccurate understanding of end times prophecy because they're applying the prophecy to the wrong people. The term Jew did not exist until the 18th century, and it is a purely English creation. The Hebrew word often translated Jew in our modern Bible translations is Strong's H3064, Yehudi, which means a Yehudite or Judaite or Jew, or descendant of Yehuda, which means Judah. So who is a Jew a descendant of? Judah, not all of Israel. The first time the word Yehudi is used in Scripture is in 2 Kings, referring to the men of the southern house of Judah, as separate and apart from the men of the northern house of Israel. 2 Kings 16, verses 5-6. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to wage war on Jerusalem, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not conquer him. At that time, Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Elath for Syria, and drove the men of Judah, that is, Yehudi, from Elath, and the Edomites came to Elath, where they dwell to this day. In Scripture, a Jew is either 1, a person of the single tribe of Judah, 2, a person of the kingdom of Judah, or 3, a person of the later region of Judea, depending on the time period in history that you're reading about. Despite the intense propaganda being spread everywhere today to have a counterfeit group claim a name that does not rightfully belong to them, the whole people of Israel were never called Jews. A quick disclaimer here, which I shouldn't even need to do, but there are those who tend to make giant leaps to false conclusions. This is not to suggest that the modern state of Israel and the Jewish people should not be living in the land today. This is only addressing the scriptural and historical fact that they are not biblical Israel. To understand our position on who should be in the land today, please see our teaching, Whose Land Is It Anyways? Spoiler alert, the Jewish people living there today should be in the land. Now moving on. Yahweh entered into a marriage covenant with all of Israel at Mount Sinai, not just the tribe of Judah. 4 main sects of Judaism developed over the centuries from the end of the Babylonian captivity until the destruction of the Second Temple. First, we have the Pharisees. They adhered strictly to both oral tradition and the written law. They interpreted the law in a way that allowed for evolving commentary. They placed great emphasis on purity rituals, tithing, and detailed observance of the commandments. They believed in the resurrection of the dead, angels, and the coming Messiah. Their approach shaped what later became Rabbinic or Talmudic Judaism. Second, there were the Sadducees. They were often in conflict with the Pharisees, particularly over aspects of theology and tradition. They were closely tied to the priestly class. They held significant power in the Jewish legislative and judicial assembly called the Sanhedrin. They did not believe in the resurrection of the dead, the existence of angels, or the concept of an eternal punishment. They accepted only the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, as binding and did not embrace the religious traditions of the Pharisees. They were associated with the temple's administration. Their political influence diminished after the temple's destruction in AD 70, until they eventually disappeared altogether. The third group were the Essenes. They are linked to the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran in the mid-20th century. They practiced strict communal living, ritual purity, and awaited divine intervention and restoration. They upheld a highly apocalyptic worldview, awaiting the end of the current age. They practiced shared property and monastic-like communal life. They avoided the temple practices under the Sadducees. Their strict interpretation of the Torah and estrangement from urban centers distinguished them from the other groups. And the fourth sect were the Zealots. They were both a religious group and a political movement opposing Roman occupation. They viewed Roman authority as a violation of divine sovereignty, leading some factions toward militant rebellion and violence. They adhered to Jewish law. They believed only God should reign over Israel. And they made their final stand against the Roman armies at Masada in AD 73. Archaeologists have confirmed their fortress ruins near the Dead Sea. Since the destruction of Judah in AD 70, 2 sects developed within Judaism. The first sect was Rabbinic, also called Talmudic Judaism. The rabbis claimed lineage from the Pharisees. The oral law, which was eventually written in the Mishnah and interpreted in the Talmud, guided religious practice. The Talmud's role became central in Jewish religious life, shaping theology, ethics, and community practice. And the second sect were the Karaites. They developed during the early medieval period. They reject the Talmudic authority embraced by Rabbinic Judaism. They believe in following only the Hebrew Bible for doctrine and practice and reject human traditions. They use a strict literal approach to interpreting the religious festivals and laws in the Hebrew Bible. And they experienced a period of growth between AD 70 and 900 in the Middle East and North Africa. The term Judaism by itself always refers to Rabbinic, which is Talmudic Judaism. Now, as Nebuchadnezzar's army was advancing on Jerusalem, the prophet Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant from the temple and hid it in a cave away from the Babylonians. We read about this in 2 Maccabees from the Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. 2 Maccabees 2 verses 1 to 8. One finds in the records that Jeremiah the prophet ordered those who were being deported to take some of the fire, as has been told, and that the prophet, after giving them the law, instructed those who were being deported not to forget the commandments of the Lord, nor to be led astray in their thoughts upon seeing the gold and silver statues and their adornment. And with other similar words he exhorted them that the law should not depart from their hearts. It was also in the writing that the prophet, having received an oracle, ordered that the tent and the ark should follow with him, and that he went out to the mountain where Moses had gone up and had seen the inheritance of God. And Jeremiah came and found a cave, and he brought there the tent and the ark and the altar of incense, and he sealed up the entrance. Some of those who followed him came up to mark the way, but could not find it. When Jeremiah learned of it, he rebuked them and declared, "The place shall be unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows his mercy. And then the Lord will disclose these things, and the glory of the Lord and the cloud will appear, as they were shown in the case of Moses, and as Solomon asked that the place should be specifically consecrated. From this point until Yeshua Messiah came, Yahweh's presence was no longer with the house of Judah. The temple was completely destroyed and the people were taken captive to Babylon. The Jews found themselves without a place to worship and without a way to make sacrifices to atone for their sins. So they began forming a new religion with a different house of worship. They built for themselves houses of assembly. The Hebrew word for house is bet, and the word for assembly is Knesset, and the Greek word for a Beit Knesset is a synagogue. This new religion, Judaism, spread back to Jerusalem after the 70-year exile was completed. However, the majority of the Jewish people remained in Babylon, and after the destruction of the Second Temple in AD 70, Babylon was the center for Jewish learning for almost 2,000 years. When the Jewish people returned to Jerusalem under the control of the Medo-Persian kings, they began building a new temple. This new temple did not have Yahweh's presence in the Ark of the Covenant. We read from Wikipedia, "In antiquity, Judaism revolved around the temple in Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin, which governed the nation, was located in the temple precincts. The temple service was at the heart of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur proceedings. The temple was central to the three pilgrim festivals, namely Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, when all Jews were incumbent to gather in Jerusalem. Every 7 years, all Jews were required to assemble at the temple for the Hakhel reading. The 49-day counting of the Omer recalls the Omer offering, which was offered at the temple every day between Passover and Shavuot. The 8-day festival of Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple after its desecration by Antiochus IV. A number of fast days, including the 9th of Av, the 10th of Tevet, and the 17th of Tammuz, all recall the destruction of the temple. And from their website, The Spiritual Life, in 539 BCE, Babylon fell to the Persians and the Babylonian exile ended, and a number of the exiles, but by no means all and probably a minority, returned to Jerusalem. They were the descendants of the original exiles and had never lived in Judah. Judah, now called Yehud, was a Persian province, and the returnees with their Persian connections in Babylon were in control of it. They represented also the descendants of the old Yahweh alone movement, but the religion they instituted was significantly different from both monarchic Yahwism and modern Judaism. The Yahweh alone party returned to Jerusalem after the Persian conquest of Babylon and became the ruling elite of Yehud. Much of the Hebrew Bible was assembled, revised, and edited by them in the 5th century BCE, including the Torah, the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the historical works, and much of the prophetic and wisdom literature. Second Temple Judaism was divided into theological factions, notably the Pharisees and the Sadducees, besides numerous smaller sects such as the Essenes, messianic movements such as early Christianity, and closely related traditions such as Samaritanism, which gives us the Samaritan Pentateuch, an important witness of the text of the Torah independent of the Masoretic text. For centuries, the traditional understanding has been that Judaism came before Christianity, and that Christianity separated from Judaism sometime after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Starting in the latter half of the 20th century, some scholars have begun to argue that the historical picture is quite a bit more complicated than that. In the 1st century, many Jewish sects existed in competition with each other. See Second Temple Judaism. The sects which eventually became Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity were but two of these. Some scholars have begun to propose a model which envisions a twin birth of Christianity and Judaism rather than a separation of the former from the latter. For example, Robert Goldenberg, 2002, asserts that it is increasingly accepted among scholars that at the end of the 1st century CE, there were not yet two separate religions called Judaism and Christianity. Daniel Boyarin, 2002, proposes a revised understanding of the interactions between nascent Christianity and nascent rabbinical Judaism in late antiquity, which views the two religions as intensely and complexly intertwined throughout this period. The Amoraim were the Jewish scholars of late antiquity who codified and commented upon the law and the biblical texts. The final phase of redaction of the Talmud into its final form took place during the 6th century CE by the scholars known as the Savareim. This phase concludes the Chazal era, foundational to Rabbinic Judaism. And from the website My Jewish Learning, Jews in Babylon, the Original Diaspora Community, by Professor Isaiah Gaffney. The roots of the Babylonian community were very ancient, dating as far back as the end of the biblical period and the deportations from the land of Israel, which both preceded and followed the destruction of the first temple, 586 BCE. As it grew and prospered, the community tended to emphasize its antiquity. By the time it had produced its own version of the Talmud, it manifested a kind of local patriotism. Was not Abraham the father of the nation born beyond the river? Were not the Euphrates and the Tigris the two rivers which flowed out of Eden according to Genesis? The Jews of Babylonia, therefore, considered themselves the aristocracy of the Jewish people. Even the land of Mesopotamia acquired an aura of sanctity in their eyes, second to the land of Israel, of course, but holier than all other countries. The history of this community during the first millennium of its existence remains obscure. Following the Hellenistic conquest of the East, the Jews of Babylonia, like their brethren in Palestine, came under Seleucid rule. From the 2nd century BCE until the 3rd century CE, they were subjects of the Aracid Parthians. The Parthian kingdom, a loose federation of feudal principalities, was a convenient structure for them as long as they gave their support in times of war. The rulers kept out of the internal affairs of the ethnic groups under their domination. The little that is known of the Jews there at the time came from the quill of Josephus Flavius. They were very numerous, and their brethren in Judea sought their help while preparing their revolt against Rome. This Roman historian also mentions 2 episodes which he most probably learned from the literary fragments: the adventure of 2 brothers from Nichardia, who had founded a kind of thieves' state near the city of Seleucia, and the famous conversion of the king of Adiabene to Judaism. It is only after the fall of the Second Temple in 70 CE and the Bar Kokhba Revolt, 132 to 135 CE, that one can truly follow the history of Babylonian Jewry, which becomes even clearer after the fall of the Parthian regime and the accession of the Sasanian dynasty in 224 CE. Sources relating to the first 2 centuries of the Christian era make no mention in any form of organized Torah studies in Babylonia and note hardly any Babylonian scholars. We do know that the Rabbi Akiva in his many travels arrived in Nicardia, where he announced the leap year. After Bar Kokhba's revolt, we hear for the first time about groups of sages who went down to Babylonia, undoubtedly following the religious persecution which followed the crushing of the revolt. In Babylon, the nephew of Rabbi Joshua Hananiah attempted to proclaim the order of the Hebrew calendar, a prerogative which until then had been indisputably reserved for the leadership in Palestine. Although Hananiah was forced to make a retraction, it was nevertheless the first manifestation of Babylonian independence from the Palestinian center. During the late 2nd or early 3rd century, we hear about a title for this community's political leader for the first time: Rosh Hagolah, the Exilarch or Prince of Exile. Although nothing is known about the origins of this institution, it is certain that Babylonian Jews in the Talmudic period regarded the Exilarch as a scion of the house of David. Many Talmudic texts compare his attributes to that of the Nasi, which is a prince in the land of Israel, another manifestation of the singular status of this Jewry. The new Sasanian regime, unlike the Parthian, was far more centralized and strictly Zoroastrian. Certain Jewish sages were afraid that the kind and the clergy would interfere in community affairs. Others, on the other hand, hoped to find a modus vivendi with the Sasanians. The sage Samuel summarized this attitude in his famous saying, "The law of the land is law." On the whole, the Jews of Babylon adopted this view, which brought them an extensive period of prosperity and cultural blossoming. It was during this period that Babylonia emerged as the great center of religious studies, which rivaled Palestine. Between the 3rd and the 5th centuries, Babylonian academies, the future yeshivot, established a method of commentary on the Bible, which became the basis for the Babylonian Talmud. This tradition, later disseminated by the Geonim, which was the heads of the Babylonian academies, was to be accepted by the entire Jewish world. Paradoxically, perhaps, the sons of the community, of which nothing is known prior to the 3rd century, determined the norms and behavior of Jews throughout the world for 15 centuries. Menahem Posner, in his article, What is Judaism?, mentioned 3 sources of God's Word that are at the heart of Judaism: the Torah, the Talmud, and the Kabbalah. We read about the Talmud on Chabad.org. What is the Talmud? The primary text of oral law. Author Menachem Posner. The Talmud is a collection of writings that covers the full gamut of Jewish law and tradition, compiled and edited between the 3rd and 6th centuries. Written in a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic, it records the teachings and discussions of the great academies of the Holy Land and Babylonia. With 2,711 densely packed pages and countless commentaries, learning Talmud is the occupation of a lifetime. As you can read in What is Torah in its narrowest sense, Torah refers to the 5 books of Moses, while Talmud contains rabbinic commentaries, traditions, and laws couched in the Torah's infinite wisdom. However, the term Torah is often used to describe all of Jewish scholarship, which includes the Talmud. The main text of the Talmud is the Mishnah, a collection of terse teachings written in Hebrew, redacted by Rabbi Yehuda the Prince in the years following the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Over the next several hundred years after the Mishnah's completion, the rabbis continued to teach and expound. Many of those teachings were collected into 2 great bodies, the Jerusalem Talmud, containing the teachings of the rabbis in the land of Israel, and the Babylonian Talmud, featuring the teachings of the rabbis of Babylon. These 2 works are written in Aramaic dialects used in Israel and Babylonia, respectively. There are many commentaries written on the Talmuds, mostly on the Babylonian Talmud, which is more widely studied. Notably, the elucidating notes of Rashi from the 10th century France and Tosafat, a group of rabbis who lived in the years following Rashi, many of whom were his descendants and or his students. These 2 commentaries are printed together with the Babylonian Talmud, surrounding the main text, having become a part of the study of Talmud. The standard edition of the Babylonian Talmud comprises 2,711 double-sided pages with many, many more pages filled with the teachings of other commentators. So one key takeaway here is that when Jews refer to the Torah, they are not just referring to the written Torah that we teach adherence to at Whole Word Ministries, but also the Jewish tradition of an oral law as well. What does Scripture tell us about adding to the Torah as written down by Moses? Deuteronomy 4 verse 2, you shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your God that I command you. Proverbs 30 verse 6, do not add to his words, lest he rebuke you and you be found a liar. And what did Yeshua say to the Pharisees about their oral traditions? Mark 7 verses 1 to 9. Now when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? And he said to them, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men. And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. The rabbis of modern Judaism hold the Pharisees of the first century to be their forefathers. We read in the book of Acts that the Pharisees taught the law in the synagogues every Sabbath. However, we also read in Scripture that they themselves did not live by the law. They were hypocrites. The Pharisees followed an oral law that Yeshua condemned as the traditions of men. Acts 15 verse 21. For from ancient generations, Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he is read every Sabbath in the synagogues. Matthew 23 verses 1 to 36. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. For they preach but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools! For which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it, and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside also may be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you'll flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Also from Chabad.org, why was the Talmud written? Was the oral law supposed to remain oral? Author Yehuda Sherpin. It is an owner's manual and companion guide, so to speak, for the Torah. With it, we can understand what the Torah means and determine the details of the various commandments. Furthermore, we have rules of exegesis so that we can determine the Torah's views on various issues that are not directly addressed. The oral Torah comprises traditions and extrapolations based on the inscribed Torah, the Bible. Now, once again, from the Jewish website Chabad.org, who compiled the Babylonian Talmud? Author Yossi Ives. The Talmud is a vast compendium of Jewish law and lore, the product of several hundred years of scholarship. There were actually two Talmuds, Jerusalem and Babylonian. They are quite different works. The Babylonian Talmud is uniquely vast, comprehensive, and marvelously constructed. It is one of the greatest products of religious literature of all time, a central pillar in both the teachings and practice of Judaism. It is impossible to provide a fitting description of the Talmud. It needs to be experienced to be understood. And like that metaphorical elephant, it can be approached from so many angles. Some will be struck by the vastness of the work. It consists of 2,711 folios, or 5,422 pages, mostly written in dense cryptic text. Others will be astonished by its comprehensiveness. There is hardly a topic of Jewish law or life that is not covered somewhere in the Talmud. It serves as an encyclopedia of the oral teaching of the early sages. The impact that the Talmud has on Jewish life cannot be overstated. It is the final word on Jewish rite and practice. The spiritual fulfillment Jews derive from poring over its pages is immense, as if one is almost present in the study halls of antiquity. Judaism as we know it today would be unimaginable without the Talmud. Now let's take a look at some samples from the Talmud to see if we agree with these authors that it is so amazing. Remember, as you read these excerpts, that Talmudic Judaism teaches that these words are inspired by God and are, quote, the final word on Jewish rite and practice. But before we take a look at the samples, we're going to define a few terms first, and we're going to introduce some of the participants in the discussions in the Talmud. I'm not going to read everything, just the highlights, but you can pause the video on each screen to read the whole thing, or go to Wikipedia to read it on their website for yourself. So, definition of terms from Wikipedia. The Mishnah is the first written collection of the Jewish oral traditions that are known as the Oral Torah. The Gemara comprises a collection of rabbinical analysis and commentaries on the Mishnah and is presented in 63 books. The Bereta designates a tradition in the Oral Torah of Rabbinic Judaism that is not incorporated in the Mishnah. The Tosefta is a compilation of the Jewish oral law from the late 2nd century CE, the period of the Mishnah and the Jewish sages known as the Tanaim. Halakha is the collective body of Jewish religious laws that are derived from the written and oral Torah. Agada is the non-legalistic exegesis which appears in the classical rabbinical literature of Judaism, particularly the Talmud and Midrash. The Tanaim were the rabbinic sages whose views are recorded in the Mishnah from approximately 10 CE to 220 CE. Amoraim refers to Jewish scholars of the period from about 200 to 500 CE who said or told over the teachings of the oral Torah. Now, the participants in the discussions from the Talmud that we're going to be showing you. Just an FYI, I'm not concerned about pronouncing their names correctly. Okay, so the purpose to describing these participants is to demonstrate the high esteem the leadership of Talmudic Judaism places on them. These men are considered the fathers of modern Judaism. The first is Akiva ben Joseph, and he is actually credited with being the father of Talmudic Judaism. He was born in 50 CE. This Rabbi Akiva was a leading Jewish scholar and sage, a leading contributor to the Mishnah and to Midrash Halakha. He is referred to in the Tosafot as the chief of the sages. The next participant is one of Akiva's students and a man frequently quoted in the samples that we're going to be showing you. Rabbi Meir was a Jewish sage who lived in the time of the Mishnah. He was one of the Tanaim of the 4th generation, which was 139 to 163 AD, and he was a disciple of Rabbi Akiva. He is the second most frequently mentioned sage in the Mishnah and is mentioned over 3,000 times in the Babylonian Talmud. According to the Talmud, his father was a descendant of the Roman Emperor Nero, who, it is said, escaped death at the time of his deposition and became subsequently a convert to Judaism. And that's an interesting belief, considering the fact that the early Christians were certain that Nero was the Antichrist. Now, according to the Babylonian Talmud, all Mishnahs that state laws without introducing them with an indication that they are attributed to any one of the sages are always attributed to Meir. The next participant is considered a type of successor to the father of Talmudic Judaism, Akiva ben Joseph. Judah ha-Nasi, also called Judah the Prince or Judah the President, or known simply as Rabbi, was a 2nd century rabbi and chief redactor and editor of the Mishnah. He lived from approximately 135 to 217 CE. He was a key leader of the Jewish community in Roman-occupied Judea after the Bar Kokhba revolt. He was the first Nasi to have that title added permanently to his name. He's also referred to as my teacher, the master par excellence, or our master, or our holy master. The next participant was the center of the collegiate circle of the patriarch Judah ha-Nasi. Hiya, or Hiya the Great. He lived 180 to 230 CE and was one of the Chazal, or rabbinic Jewish sages in the land of Israel during the transitional generation between the Tanaic and Amoraic eras. He was the center of the collegiate circle of the patriarch Judah ha-Nasi, who we mentioned already. Judah's admiration for Hiya was so great that he used to say, Hiya and his sons are as meritorious as the patriarchs. Hiya is portrayed in the Talmud as a model of virtue and goodness. The next participant was a student of Judah ha-Nasi and Hiya the Great, Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai was an Amora who lived in the 3rd century and of the first generation of the Amoraim of the land of Israel. Yanai was prominent both as a halachist and aggadist. His name is mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud 176 times and in the Jerusalem Talmud 254 times. The last participant that we'll mention is Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzhak, or Samuel bar Isaac. He was a rabbi from the 3rd generation of Amoraim. He lived in Babylonia and eventually moved to the land of Israel. Along with Rabbi Zerah, he was considered one of the greatest rabbis in the land of Israel. Now, these samples we're about to show you are taken from the Jewish website chabad.org, which has the whole Talmud online. I'll provide a link to their website in the description below. I'm going to put 52 screenshots up for you to pause the video and read each one, because if I read them to you, this video will be removed on some platforms. These are from 2 sections of the Talmud discussing menstrual impurity, the blood that comes from breaking the hymen, and wedding night intercourse as it relates to marriage with infants, toddlers, and children. These discussions are extensive in the Talmud. There's far more than what is shared here. Discussions between men that are believed to have God's inspiration and wisdom, men who are looked up to and revered by the leadership of Talmudic Judaism. The acts being discussed here are not being condemned. They're being normalized and condoned. They are being approved of. And for the record, having a moral objection to what you're reading here is not anti-Semitic. The belief that most adherents to Judaism have no moral objection to this evil is what is anti-Semitic. There is no conceivable scenario where any of these discussions could be considered acceptable. There is no conceivable scenario where a group of men who casually discuss the systemic and repeated rape of toddlers and children would be considered wise, noble, or righteous. There is no conceivable scenario where these discussions would be considered anything but horrific and evil. These men and this book are not inspired by Yahweh. This is straight from the heart of Satan. Revelation 3 verse 9, Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. John 8 verse 39 to 47, They answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works your father did. They said to him, We were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. Jesus said to them, If God were your father, you would love me, for I came from God and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. We have to believe that most adherents to Judaism are unaware that their religious texts discuss and support the rape of toddlers, and that if they knew, they would cease to follow such evil books and the evil men who wrote them. Isaiah 5 verse 20, Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. According to Menachem Posner, the third source of God's word that is at the heart of Judaism is the Kabbalah. We read about the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism from the website myjewishlearning.com. Mysticism, the Zohar. This influential work of Jewish mysticism continues to inspire spiritual seekers. By My Jewish Learning. The Zohar is the most important work of Jewish mysticism and one of the central sacred texts of the Jewish tradition. It emerged in late 13th century Spain, most likely authored by the Kabbalist Moses de Leon, though it claims to be an ancient text revealed by Rabbi Simon Bar Yochai in the 2nd century. Structured as an esoteric commentary on the Torah, the Zohar weaves a rich tapestry of midrashim, parables, and mystical insights to unveil the hidden nature of God and the universe. To understand what the Zohar is, it's helpful to know something about Kabbalah, a particular form of Jewish mysticism that emerged in the 13th century. The mystical quest for encounter with God is arguably as old as Judaism itself. Biblical figures like Abraham and Moses had direct encounters with God, as did the Jewish prophets. Ezekiel in particular had an ecstatic vision of God and the angels that provided significant fodder for the imaginations of later Jewish mystics. Literature from the rabbinic period daringly described God's physical form and retinue in startling detail. Kabbalah built on these earlier traditions, but took a more intimate view of God, seeing God as more closely and vulnerably enmeshed with humanity and the world. It can be seen as a reaction against the rationalist approach of Maimonides, the medieval philosopher who saw God as perfect and all-powerful, distant and self-sufficient, an unmoved mover of the universe. Maimonides' God had no need for people to fulfill the divine commandments, which were simply mechanisms to teach wisdom and ethics. Kabbalists rejected this view, contending that the mitzvot are of immediate and vital importance to the world and to God. For the Kabbalists, God is neither remote nor self-sufficient, but omnipresent and wholly invested in the world. These are among the beliefs that animate the Zohar, which is structured as a series of interpretations of the Torah, many related as discussions between Rabbi Simon Bar Yochai and his 9 principal disciples, his son Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yitzhak, Rabbi Hezekiah, Rabbi Higya, Rabbi Yosei, Rabbi Yisa, and Rabbi Aha. The Zohar's ideas are difficult to capture in everyday language, often relying on metaphor, parable, and suggestive language to explain itself. This makes it challenging to capture its tenets in prose, but several ideas are central. These include the 10 Sephirot. In the thinking of the Zohar, God's innermost self, the Ein Sof, is unknowable. But other parts of God are not. According to the Kabbalists, God enters the world through 10 emanations, or Sephirot. Crown, wisdom, understanding, loving kindness, strength and justice, beauty and harmony, eternity and victory, splendor and glory, foundation, kingdom and sovereignty. Keter is the highest as well as the most abstract and remote. It is followed by Hoshma and Binah, the primordial father and mother emanations. These in turn birth the next 7 Sephirot. The lowest and most imminent Sephirah is Shekinah, God's indwelling presence on earth. The condition of and relationship between these Sephirot is not only vital to the world, but strongly influenced by human action. Harmony and balance between the Sephirot is therefore one of the highest goals of human behavior. Ethical living, performance of mitzvot, and prayer can all help to bring the Sephirot into better balance. Dualities. The Kabbalistic fascination with dualities is clear from a cursory look at the Sephirot, several of which partnered to birth new emanations. Indeed, the male-female duality is arguably one of the most important in Kabbalah. The duality between good and evil also plays a significant role, with Kabbalistic thought making copious room not only for God's goodness, but also demonic forces of evil. Equally, the duality of exile and return, both Israel's exile from the Promised Land and the exile of aspects of the divine from God itself, pervades Kabbalistic thought. Cleaving to God. The highest form of spiritual expression is clinging to God. This is called devekut. The term appears many times in the Bible, often alongside commandments, suggesting that devekut is realized through obedience to God's ways. Medieval commentators extended this idea to say that devekut is achieved through imitation of God, and the Kabbalists took it one step further, believing that devekut is union with God, achieved through mystical practices, meditation, prayer, study, and aligning oneself with the flow of divine energy. In its early years, the Zohar was studied mainly in small circles of devoted Kabbalists. But after the expulsion of Spanish Jewry in 1492, the Zohar's influence grew dramatically. Some scholars argue that many exiles, shaken by persecution, found solace in its worldview. Others think that the Zohar contained ideas that meshed nicely with those found in the lands that ultimately absorbed Jewish exiles. By the 16th century, the town of Safed in northern Israel, located near the traditional tomb of Rabbi Simon Bar Yochai, became a Kabbalistic hub. Leading figures such as Moses Cordovera and Isaac Luria settled there, combining the teachings of the Zohar with their own mystical systems. Their work helped establish Kabbalah as a major force in Jewish life. In later centuries, the Zohar continued to shape Jewish movements across the world. It played a central role in the failed 17th century Messianic movement of Shabbatai Zavi, and in Eastern Europe it became a foundation for Hasidism, whose leaders often quoted and wrote commentaries on the text. Even the Vilna Gaon, a critic of Hasidism, revered the Zohar and encouraged its study. Among Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, the Zohar has been widely read and regarded as a sacred book up until the present. With the rise of the Enlightenment in Europe, Kabbalah lost standing in many Jewish communities. Both Reform and Orthodox leaders in Western Europe tended to set aside or downplay mystical texts, and the Zohar was less central to mainstream Jewish practice. Still, in Hasidic and Sephardic circles, its influence endured. Today, the Zohar is experiencing renewed attention. A growing interest in spirituality and mysticism worldwide has brought new readers to Kabbalistic texts. In Israel, pride in Sephardic and Mizrahi heritage, along with the founding of new Kabbalistic academies, has also fueled a revival of study. The Kabbalah and its book, the Zohar, share many false beliefs with the Zoroastrian religion of the Medo-Persian Empire. We read about the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism from the Christian perspective at Koinonia House. Kabbalah and the Rise of Mysticism, author Chuck Meisler. Whether disillusioned by the self-imposed blinders and myopia of contemporary science, or frustrated by the moral bankruptcy of unbridled materialism, increasing numbers of desperate people are now seeking answers outside the realm of natural phenomena and are pursuing the supernatural. The anguished plea of the disenfranchised now begs the question, is there anyone out there? Beyond the beguiling allure of many contemporary forms of ancient paganism, such as the New Age, Wicca, and others, many people have become attracted to a form of Hebrew mysticism known as Kabbalah. The popular press is speckled with articles of prominent Hollywood personalities who have taken up a popular contemporary version of Kabbalah. Kabbalah, originally simply designated received tradition, now generically it refers to Jewish mysticism in all its forms. Denotatively, however, it refers specifically to the esoteric theosophy that crystallized in 13th century Spain and Provence, France. It is particularly paradoxical to find these occultic practices embedded within Judaism, despite the numerous explicit prohibitions against all forms of the occult recorded throughout the very Torah that is so highly venerated among the Jews. It is essential to explore the current resurgence of Kabbalah within a broader historical perspective. Judaism redefined. Having rejected Jesus Christ as the Messiah and enduring the subsequent destruction of the temple in AD 70, Mosaic Judaism was faced with a serious dilemma. The Torah and all its related practices had emphasized that without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. How could there be a continuation of the prescribed sacrifices without an altar and a temple? This and other related issues resulted in the Council of Jamnia in AD 90, which began redefining Judaism and led to the formulation of the Talmud, 3rd to the 6th centuries, and what is known as the Geonic era, 7th to the 11th centuries. Kabbalah emerges. One of the basic works that was to impact all subsequent mystical movements in Judaism is the Sefer HaZohar, or Zohar for short. This monumental work was composed by Moses Delen, born in Leon, Spain, who lived in Guadalajara, former Spanish kingdom of Castile, until 1290, and thereafter led a life of wandering. Delen was a prolific writer, completely immersed in mysticism. The Zohar, his greatest work, was written over 30 years in Aramaic. To lend greater weight to the doctrines expressed in his book, Delen ascribed it to a legendary Palestinian scholar, Simon ben Yochai, claiming that a Spanish Jewish scholar and mystic named Moses ben Naaman had found the book in a cave in which Simon and his son Eliezer had once hid from Roman persecution. When Moses tried to send the book to his son in Catalonia, Delen claims he intercepted it and began making copies, which he then circulated among the learned. However, Delen failed in this attempt to hide his authorship. Even in his own lifetime, a Palestinian mystic, doubting the authenticity and antiquity of the Zohar, came to the royal court at nearby Valladolid to investigate the matter. Delen promised to produce the original copy, but he died before the question of his veracity could be settled. Since the 16th century, considerable evidence has definitely established Delen's authorship of this unique book, which for more than 6 centuries has exercised a far-reaching influence on Judaism. The Zohar depicts the Godhead as a dynamic flow of force composed of numerous aspects. Above and beyond all human contemplation is God as he is in himself the unknowable, immutable Ein Sof, or infinite nothingness. Other aspects or attributes knowable through God's relation to the created world emanate from Ein Sof in a configuration of 10 sephirot, realms or planes, through which the divine power further radiates to create the cosmos. Zoharic theosophy concentrates on the nature and interaction of these 10 sephirot as symbols of the inner life and processes of the Godhead. Because the Sephirot are viewed as archetypes for everything in the world of creation, an understanding of their workings ostensibly illuminate the inner workings of the entire cosmos and all of history. The Zohar thereby provides a cosmic symbolic interpretation of Judaism and of the history of Israel, in which the Torah and commandments, as well as Israel's life in exile, become symbols for events and processes in the inner life of God. Thus interpreted, the proper observance of the commandments by man assumes a cosmic significance. Right at the outset, the concept of Ein Sof is, among other things, a tragic attempt to depersonalize God. In contrast to the knowable, capricious, and thus untrustworthy Allah of the Quran, or the unknowable nothingness, their words, of Ein Sof, the Yahweh of the Old Testament is a God who delights in making and keeping his promises. Furthermore, any attempt to chart the inner life of the Godhead by means of the Sephirot or any other is akin to uncovering the Father's nakedness, a sin of grave disrespect emphasized in the Tanakh itself. The disciplines of Kabbalah include meditative practices that promise to enable individuals to share and participate in the diverse dimensions of God's being, similar to the claims of New Age aspirants as well. Kabbalistic discipline was understood to be limited to a rarefied elite who were profoundly learned in the main texts of Talmudic Judaism prior to their immersion in Kabbalistic studies. Kabbalistic communities soon developed, generally organized as secret societies of disciples that gathered around a specially gifted mystical teacher. Such communities soon spread from Spain and France to Northern and Eastern Europe and to the Mediterranean basin. By the 16th century on, Kabbalah had an increasingly broad appeal among learned Jews, especially in Eastern Europe under the influence of Rabbi Isaac Luria. Lurianic Kabbalah. 16th century Lurianic Kabbalah, named for its formulator Isaac ben Solomon Luria, developed dramatically the cosmic aspect of the Zohar. The Lurianic system represented a response to the cataclysmic experience of Jewish exiles expelled from Iberia in the 1490s, and it projected this experience onto the divine world. In this system, the Ein Sof withdrew itself at the outset of creation, making room for the world, but also for evil. A cosmic catastrophe occurred during emanation when vessels of the divine light shattered and the sparks were imprisoned in the world in shards of evil. Luria held that God, as well as Israel, was in need of redemption from exile, and that humanity was assigned the critical role in the cosmic drama of redemption. The human task, through prayer and proper observance of the commandments, becomes nothing less than the redemption of the world and the reunification of the Godhead. It would seem that without you and me, God won't be able to get his act together. Get serious. However, there was indeed a man assigned the critical role in this cosmic drama who was indeed fully qualified, worthy, and capable for the role. He is presently sitting on his Father's throne as you read this. Luria's thought provided the basis for transforming Kabbalah into a popular messianic movement that infused the rabbinic traditions and affected all Jewry, paving the way for Sabbatean messianism after Sabbatai Zevi in the 17th century and Hasidism in the 18th century. Hasidic Judaism. In the Hebrew Bible, the word Hasid usually refers to a pious or righteous person. The plural is Hasidim. This usage continues in later Jewish writings. By the 11th and 12th centuries, however, the term Hasid implied a person involved in a specifically mystical form of contemplative piety. As such, it came to be applied to a group of German Jewish mystics known as the Hasidei Ashkenaz, or German pietists. The Hasidei Ashkenaz became known for rigorous ascetic practices such as sleep deprivation exercises, fasting, and bathing during winter in freezing streams. These practices were designed to suppress the power of physical appetites for sleep, food, and warmth, for example, and to place the body under the dominion of the soul as it strove for intimate knowledge of God. Hasidism, as we know it today, developed in the mid-18th century in Eastern Europe from the Kabbalah and continues today in dozens of Hasidic communities around the world. Some communities consist of only a few hundred members in isolated Jewish neighborhoods of New York, Los Angeles, and Jerusalem. Other Hasidic groups, such as the Satmar Hasidim and the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim, have an international membership numbering in the tens of thousands. All of these communities trace their origins to a single individual, 18th century Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, better known to the Jewish world as the Baal Shem Tov, Hebrew for Master of the Divine Name. Through his use of the name of God, the Baal Shem Tov was believed to perform miraculous cures. Alphanumeric gymnastics. In Kabbalah, great importance is attached to manifold manipulations of letters and numbers, particularly those involved in many of the names of God, to which are ascribed magical properties. They believe that concealed within the stories and laws of the Torah are secret guides to the mysterious powers hidden in the various names of God and to the creative force of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The manipulation of the numeric values attached to the alphabet is called gematria, and there are virtually unlimited varieties of rules for their use. A study of gematria will quickly demonstrate the proverb within the computer industry that if you torture the data long enough, it will eventually confess to anything. Strangely, we owe a debt for some of the discoveries of the Kabbalistic scholarship over the centuries. It was the esoteric skills of the Jewish Kabbalists who were attached to the courts of Europe that developed the techniques of cryptology, which emerged during the Renaissance. These techniques led to mechanical aids, ultimately culminating in the Enigma coding machines of the Germans during World War II, which in turn accelerated the development of computers to defeat them, by John von Neumann in the US and Alan Turing in Great Britain. These computers, in turn, have now led to the rediscovery of some of the astonishing properties of the biblical text that has caused such sensationalism, some valid, much fanciful, today. Occult practices. Anyone with a modicum of biblical literacy should realize that occult practices are expressly prohibited in the scriptures. Scripture condemns by name spiritism, mediumism, and necromancy, and various forms of sorcery and divination, including astrology and magic. In ancient Israel, divination was a capital crime. If someone was caught casting a horoscope or other occultic practice, they were put to death. Why? Because God is jealous of his uniqueness and he alone knows what the future holds. To intrude on his office is to attempt to intrude on his glory. Occult activity also courts deception and betrayal from the demonic realm and promotes evil under the guise of legitimate religious practice. Occult involvement will eventually lead to judgment for those who refuse to forsake it. We learn about the beliefs of Judaism on the Jewish website Judaism 101. 13 Principles of Faith. The closest that anyone has ever come to creating a widely accepted list of Jewish beliefs is Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith. These principles, which Rambam thought were the minimum requirements of Jewish belief, are: God exists, God is one and unique, God is incorporeal, God is eternal, prayer is to be directed to God alone and to no other, the words of the prophets are true, Moses' prophecies are true, and Moses was the greatest of the prophets. The written Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, and oral Torah, teachings now contained in the Talmud and other writings, were given to Moses. There will be no other Torah. God knows the thoughts and deeds of men. God will reward the good and punish the wicked. The Messiah will come. The dead will be resurrected. As you can see, these are very basic and general principles. Yet, as basic as these principles are, the necessity of believing each one of these has been disputed at one time or another, and the liberal movements of Judaism dispute many of these principles. Unlike many other religions, Judaism does not focus much on abstract cosmological concepts, although Jews have certainly considered the nature of God, man, the universe, life, and the afterlife at great length. See Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. There is no mandated official definitive belief on these subjects outside of the very general concepts discussed above. There is substantial room for personal opinion on all of these matters because, as I said before, Judaism is more concerned about actions than beliefs. Judaism focuses on relationships, the relationship between God and mankind, between God and the Jewish people, between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, and between human beings. Our scriptures tell the story of the development of these relationships from the time of the creation through the creation of the relationship between God and Abraham to the creation of the relationship between God and the Jewish people and forward. The scriptures also specify the mutual obligations created by these relationships. Although various movements of Judaism disagree about the nature of these obligations, some say they are absolute, unchanging laws from God. Some say they are laws from God that changed and evolve over time. Some say that these are guidelines that you can choose whether or not to follow. For more on these distinctions, see movements of Judaism. So what are these actions that Judaism is so concerned about? According to Orthodox Judaism, these actions include 613 commandments given by God in the Torah, as well as laws instituted by the rabbis and long-standing customs. These actions are discussed in depth on the page regarding halakha, Jewish law, and the pages following it. There are 5 modern Jewish movements. Orthodox Judaism follows the Torah and Talmudic traditions with minimal change. They regard halakha, Jewish law, as binding, exercise caution with modern cultural assimilation. Hasidic Judaism, a devout sect that developed in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. They stress mysticism and joyous worship. Conservative Judaism began in 19th century Europe and the United States. They believe in conserving Jewish traditions while permitting subtle adaptations in contemporary society. They keep traditional worship with a restrained approach to modern challenges. Reform Judaism. They are a movement that came out of 19th century Germany. They adapted and sometimes discarded some ceremonial laws. They allow personal interpretation to religious texts. They believe in integrating into modern cultural society. Reconstructionist Judaism. They formed in the 20th century. They treat Judaism as a religious civilization that continually evolves. They encourage democratic and community decision-making regarding religious practices. During the 18th through the 20th centuries, Talmudic Judaism has been divided into an increasing number of sects as its adherents search for their preferred method of worship. When you hear the term Judaism by itself, it always refers to one or all of the sects of Talmudic Judaism, not Karaite Judaism. Talmudic Judaism is a false religion that distorts the teachings and laws of Yahweh into a works-based salvation grounded in the traditions of men. The Talmud and its authors approve of horrific abusive acts against children and toddlers. Jewish mysticism, which is deeply ingrained in modern Judaism, practices occult rituals forbidden by Yahweh. Judaism has been fragmenting into an increasing number of movements as the beliefs and theology of the religion scatter to the four winds of heaven. Acts 26 verses 13 to 18. At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven brighter than the sun that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. And I said, Who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand upon your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me, and to those in which I will appear to you, delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes, so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. It is our sincere prayer that the followers of Judaism come home to their Savior, Yeshua Messiah, Jesus Christ. Please join us for the second installment of our Abrahamic religion series, Roman Christianity. May you be blessed by this study. Shalom.